Welcome in to the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast, the official podcast of your New Orleans Pelicans. A podcast dedicated to everything you need to know about the squad. Hear from players, coaches, broadcasters, and those who cover the NBA on a daily basis. It's time to flock up. The New Orleans Pelicans Podcast starts right now.
All right, welcome back to the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast, the official podcast of your New Orleans Pelicans. Player profiles, we continue. Zion Williamson, Trey Murphy, CJ McCollum, and now it's time to talk a little bit about Herb Jones with Andrew Lopez. That's coming up here shortly. We started a little bit already this week, Jim, talking about Joe Dumars being introduced officially as the Executive Vice President of Basketball Operations. He likes the core of this team. He's going to set principles, guidelines, standards is kind of something he's going to be focusing on the early going here of this offseason. Anything else stand out to you before we move on officially into the offseason with him?
Yeah, I think I'm interested to hear, some of the way, and really maybe more so just watch, not necessarily listen to or hear, watch some of the ways that he reshapes the roster, ways that he figures out what the identity of the team is going to be. And I think regardless of what that actually ends up being, I think trying to figure out ways for them to be better defensively, as I've touched on 8 million times on this podcast over the course of the season. The player that we're going to talk about today is a very instrumental part of that effort in terms of Herb Jones being all NBA first-team defense the season before. This year he only plays 20 games. So I think having him back and hopefully on the court for the majority of the season, all the season, will make a big difference. But I think it's not going to be the kind of thing where it's like just Herb Jones, you're the one we're going to put it all on you to make the team better defensively. They're going to have to come up with a bunch of other ways that they can improve at that end of the floor.
And that said, he missed some time when he came back. Very first game he came back, Jim, what did he do, Herb Jones?
He blocked Devin Booker at the buzzer to win a game against Phoenix. One of the most fun wins of the season. One of the games afterwards, I was thinking, I'm encouraged now. Okay, this team's going to head in the right direction. Unfortunately, that did not happen.
That's called earning your extension right there. It literally just shows you exactly how important he is. When I think of this roster with the Pelicans, two things stand to mind. We'll find out May 12th where the Pelicans will draft. So that's going to be important, obviously, as to where that goes. The other thing, obviously, is Zion Williamson. We saw the efficiency, what he could play when he's healthy and ready to play towards the end of this year. Joe Dumars talked about both of those things. Here's first his thoughts on Big Z.
Well, I'll say this. At the league office, I've had to talk to Zion a few times. So I do have a relationship with Zion that started in my role at the league office. I won't go into those conversations there, but we've talked since then. And I've talked to Zion since I became EVP here, and we had exceptional conversations on the phone. Actually, I've talked to every player. Willie and I talked, 5 minutes, Willie, on the phone, something like that? Like, we talked for a couple of minutes on the phone. But I've talked to every player on the phone. I called every player and talked to each one of them individually. So, yeah, I tried to reach out and make sure that I touch these guys and let them know, let's go. It's time. It's time here in New Orleans.
I love that.
Yeah, I mean, are we going to have, people – I feel like you could sell – to the local media, you could sell the access to the phone call between Joe Dumars and Zion the first time that they meet. You could sell that for maybe six figures. Mm-hmm. So maybe we could put that up for auction, because I feel like people would be fascinated to hear them kind of meet and talk for the first time and just kind of discuss the future and what they're looking for Zion going forward. So yeah, I mean that's a huge part of the future as far as decisions that they're going to make and what Joe Dumars is going to do here. So it was interesting also to hear him say that he had already spoken to everyone on the roster. I mean, his phone must have been blazing if he talked to all 18, 19 guys on the team just in the first day or so that he was on the job.
Yeah, no doubt. And again, as we mentioned, the lottery coming up, where the Pels will pick. Will it be a top 4, top 5, the top pick overall? Who knows? Regardless, though, Jim, I thought it was interesting. Joe Dumars said this. It doesn't matter what pick it is, there's something particular he's looking for.
I think whether it's the top 4 pick or whether it's the 50th pick, the approach that guys take to this is like, look, you're not going to be successful just with talent alone. Like, there are some intangibles that you have to have. Like, you have to have, like, you got to want to be great. Like, every player in the NBA is not striving to be just great. And so you got to figure that out. Like, does this guy really want to be great? You got to have the intangibles. Is he a worker? Is he going to show up? Does he have toughness? You know, all of those intangible things, besides he can run fast, he can jump high, he can shoot the ball. Once you get past that, I can see that. Anybody in here can see that. What you don't know is what's here. Like, does this guy have it? And so that's the part that you have to put tremendous amount of emphasis in with your staff to dig in to find out, what's this guy made of? Like, does this guy really want to be great? Is he going to come here and be a part of the culture here? Is he going to buy in? Those are the things for me, whether it's the draft, free agency, trade. Those are the things I want to know more than anything else. And with all of my staffs, I've always said that. Like, look, here's the thing, I'll just say this. Whether you draft a player, sign a free agent, or make a trade for a guy, there's two people walking in that building. There's the player and the person. You better know who the person is. Because the player can walk in there and look beautiful, but the person may not be the right person for your building. And so for me, I always put a tremendous emphasis on who's the person. I can see the talent, but I need to know who the person is. So we'll do that here. We'll put a tremendous amount of emphasis on the person and not just the beautiful talent that you can see with your own eyes.
I mean, some of those comments remind me of something that I learned the first few years maybe that I worked in the NBA. And this is not a Pelicans thing. This is a league-wide thing. A lot of the younger players need to, like college players, for example, that are going to come out in the draft this year, or even high school players who have a dream to play in the NBA someday, you get watched 24 hours a day. A lot of the players think that when you're younger, you think only when I have the ball in my hands are scouts paying attention to me, or only when I'm on the court. But you realize when you talk to people that work in front offices that a lot of the evaluation they do in terms of what is this person like what is his player like as a person is all the time when they think no one's watching. You know, it's like, how do you interact with your teammates in the huddle? Are you just, if you're the best player on the team and somebody throws a bad pass, do you give the guy a dirty look? Do you turn around and look at the coach and be like, get this guy off the court? So it's just what kind of teammate you are is a huge element of that. There's just so many things that players need to realize that they're constantly being evaluated. It's not just when they think they are, it's just all the time. And that's also one of the reasons why, and I'm sure Joe Dumars has done this, as every GM or scout has across the entire league. It's why they get to the games early sometimes and they sit there in the sideline and they watch, how does this guy warm up before the game? That's crucial as well. I think teams want guys who are out there early before the game, taking it seriously, getting a lather up, making sure that they're prepared both physically and mentally. So, I mean, those were some of the things I think that he addressed, was that it's not just about while the clock is ticking and you're playing your minutes. It's so many other things that lead up to the point that make you successful, so that when the ball gets thrown up in the opening tip and the lights are on and there's 20,000 people in the stands, that you've done all the work that you can to be ready to be successful at that point. You don't just show up and say, okay, hey guys, I'm here. I'm ready to play. So I think that was also, interesting to hear from him, and something that I think is something that people can think about.
Well, one guy that's absolutely always ready to play, and it was such a joy earlier this season where we spoke to his high school basketball coach to find out the beginnings of who Herb Jones is. Mm-hmm. And Herb's been Herb from the get-go. When he played from high school to college, to even in the pros. Andrew Lopez sits down with us now to go over a shortened season of Herb Jones. All right, well, welcome back, Mr. Andrew Lopez, sideline reporter for your New Orleans Pelicans. Of course, you can see him or saw him throughout the season over on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network. CJ McCollum, you gave us a little insight as to what it's like to see him professionally go through a season, especially a season like this, and yet still he performs. Herb Jones, season coming off of getting the honor that he won and making that first All-NBA defensive team and doing that, and then this season happens.
As we go through these podcasts, I think there's going to be a lot of going into it with this
commonality.
Just because, there was so many unfortunate injuries. And I know there's a lot of fans who they look at all the injuries. Man, what's going on over there? And it's like there were so many injuries that were just unlucky. And I think Herb is on that list of you die for a loose ball in a game again. You're on the West Coast. It's first game of a back-to-back, and you're diving for a loose ball, and a player falls on your arm. You try to come back from that. It's just not right, and then you end up needing another surgery, and it's like, man, it feels tough. And this was a guy who was top, first team all defense last year, top 5 in defensive player of the year. Some people's pick to win it this year. Mm-hmm. A big reason why you felt good about some of the moves you made last summer and being able to put somebody who, between Herb and DeJounte, the amount of deflections that you could generate from your backcourt was going to be incredible. And, that shoulder's bothering him all year. And it's just a very tough year. But watching Herb continue to be around the team, be on all these trips, get his work in, try to fight through it before he needed the surgery. It kind of just goes to show you that, look, this is a guy who is going to go out there and he's going to try and compete as much as he can for you, and it's a guy you still want to make sure you're building around.
You mentioned the combination of Herb and DeJounte. It was interesting because I looked up the steals leaders this season, and I was thinking, I'll just look up anyone who's played in any game. I'm not going to go by the official leaders because obviously neither of those guys played enough games, but to qualify. But DeJounte was still 3rd in steals per game, and Herb was 5th. So in the tiny sample that we saw of Herb Jones playing 20 games and DeJounte playing 31, we did see a glimmer of that. But, I mean, even some of that, I don't think that they even necessarily overlapped, that there were stretches where one or two of them were out as well. So, I mean, we didn't even really get to see much of that. But, you talk about Herb's, how determined he was to get back on the court. Everyone knows that you've been around the team for a while, Andrew, with other roles with ESPN and previous stops. Did you learn anything about him in terms of him off the court or the way he approaches the game, or what was some of the insight that you kind of gathered from just being around him on a closer basis day to day?
Just that he's just a very, you knew he was a chill guy. You knew, he was very much, I have been told stories before about Herb's off seasons where, hey man, I need you to go. I think Larry Nance, told this story at Media Day a couple years ago about, hey Herb, you need to go do this. Go take a break. I'll pay for you to go take a vacation. And Herb's idea of taking a vacation was going to Alabama, fishing one weekend, and immediately being back in New Orleans on that Monday to continue getting shots up. He is, you hear all these things and then you think, no, he really is just the epitome of a hard worker. A guy who went from, was hardly a three-point shooter in college. That was, not something he was doing. I think he made 34 threes total when he was at Alabama on the shorter three-point line, to somebody who a season ago shot 42% from three. Now that number came back down this year. He only shot 30%, 30.6. But again, the shoulder is hurting. The other, he's not ever really able to find a rhythm. So I expect that number to kind of go back up. But this is a guy who is, as committed to this as he could be, as somebody who is going to try to continue to get better.
I mentioned in the written recap season in review of Herb that you can really, his entire season basically was 1 week at the beginning of the season and a 5-week span. You mentioned, obviously his 3-point shooting went down, but we're talking a super small sample compared to the previous years. I mean, can we take anything away from the season that he had, or is it better to just be let's fold this thing up and let's move forward with it?
Well, I think if you go back to 23-24, he starts that season shooting around 30% from three. And then, because I remember looking up numbers toward the end of 23-24 where it was like, man, his percentages are like, he was like 50-something from one corner. He was really hot for most of that season. Looked like he was on that same trajectory. I think you can also see, shocker, you take away the guy who made first team all defense and how much things, didn't look great on that end because you're missing a lot of guys. And I think you look at guys like Herb who, you know what, to take it back to the last question, the one thing I've learned about him, you see a bunch of these moments where he is looking at all these other guys, like he's directing on the sidelines. I think that's probably the thing that being the sideline reporter, you are typically close to the bench. We're not going to name any arenas where you are not.
Joel and Antonio did that for you.
Yeah.
They're way different. Most of the time, though, even at those other arenas, you're still
close proximity,
right? And sometimes you're even like behind the bench in a corner. You don't have a great view of the game, but you have a great view of the bench. And watching him coach and try to teach and point things out is probably the thing that stood out to me the most. As he, we've talked a lot about him using his voice. And it seems like this is like maybe the next step of Herb Jones is him using his voice a lot more. And I think maybe using that off to the side is something that he can then use, moving forward.
That's interesting. I almost feel like kind of full circle here. Jim, you remember early in the season we spoke to his high school basketball coach.
Yeah.
Right? And it was at Herb Jones's retirement.
Jersey retirement, yeah.
And if you remember, he specifically talked about basically you just said he came in as a high school kid and like was like a coach on the floor and immediately. So as you were saying that before you just finished that, I was going to follow up with is, could you see coaching in the future for a guy like that? But it's interesting to think about that.
It's funny because I don't know if people are going to be able to play defense the way Herb Jones wants to coach. So he might he thinks he can, and then he watches somebody play defense and he's like, and he just gets frustrated with it. But going back to that, you want to talk about another thing that stood out is the kind of teammate he is how many people went to his jersey retirement ceremony. I mean, basically the whole team was there. I think that also kind of speaks to just the teammate that he is.
Yeah. You mentioned a second ago, the drop-off defensively. We did not practice this. You actually set me up perfectly for the two Pella stats I'm going to give you, and you can decide which one you want to discuss. Maybe it's both.
I like that we now have a name for it. We did not for CJ.
Yes.
Now we have Pella stats.
Yes, Pella stats. So the first number is 29, and that is New Orleans' ranking in defensive efficiency this season. It's very important to note that in the previous two seasons, they were sixth both years in defensive rating and efficiency. Herb only played 20 games this season. As we mentioned, he played the two seasons before they played 66 and 76. So, and then the second number is 4, and that is the charges drawn by Herb this season, which was actually tied for the New Orleans team lead with Kelly Olynyk, even though Herb only played the 13th most total minutes on the roster. So which of those two Pella stats do you want to discuss?
I don't think I'd hope that there was somebody else who was up there a little bit more in charges. I think Lester Quione's got one late, and I was like, man, he might vault to like second on the list. But let's talk about defensive rating, because I think, that's something that assistant coach Jaron Collins has kind of, hung his hat on the last couple of years, and the Pels in general, and Willie Green. And it's almost like, man, you might need your starters to play very good defense. And there's times where your concepts just, they're going to be the same, and you want those to kind of be there. But when you take away a Herb Jones and you take away a DeJounte Murray, and it just hurts. I mean, it really does.
Yep.
You lose a lot of schematically what you're trying to do. Like, you can do certain things because you have a Herb Jones on the floor. You can do certain things because you have a DeJounte Murray on the floor. I'm very interested to go back and look at some of these lineups that like had a Herb and an Eve on the floor at the same time. You know, what that's going to look at like in the future as Herb tries to, continues to get better, starts to use his voice. I think there's a lot to it, and to Herb's credit, I think he does have a lot to do with that, and I think that's why he was honored the way he was last year. But it just goes to show you it's very difficult to build out a good offense, a good defense, when anything. Oh, hey, you look down at the roster and top 9 guys are out tonight.
Right.
Hey, you look down at the roster and Yves Missi is the highest paid player playing tonight. It makes things a little bit more difficult on your coaching staff.
Yves Missi led the team in games played.
And
Yes.
minutes.
And
Yep. Yeah.
So, by the way, he's a rookie, right? He was a rookie?
By the way, 114.3 was the defensive rating with those two on the floor together, which I think, let's see where that were. Let's just see where that ranks.
Yeah.
You want to take a guess where that would rank if they were a defensive team by themselves?
I'm going to say about 10th, maybe?
114 this season, since NBA.com wants to go to playoffs automatically.
Yeah,
114 would have got you to about 15, 16.
Okay.
So you go from 29th to 16th with those two on the floor in a little over 400 minutes. A lot of those early with Eve. It kind of shows you how things were starting to kind of turn around.
Yeah.
Or was better with those guys on the floor. Things change. And looking forward to seeing what those two can do, especially with DeJounte on the floor.
Yeah, I mean, Gus will tell you, I tried to single-handedly change this, but it always feels like defense is the thing that we talk about the least. People always are discussing, like, okay, how does things fit with Zion? What kind of shots are they getting? How come they're struggling to shoot three-pointers? But to me, the quickest explanation of the drop-off this season was at the defensive end of the floor, the fact that they fell so far. So, I mean, that was really difficult. Lastly, for me, I mean, we talked about how Herb only played 20 games and, played 500-plus minutes, which is nothing compared to his previous years. What do you expect from him? What's the outlook for him as far as next season, him coming back from his injury, and maybe what are some of the things that you want to see from him go in his, I guess, what would be his 5th season?
Herb was like very close to a 50-40-90 last year. In 23-24, shot 49.8 from the field, 41.8 from 3, 86.7 from the free throw line. I don't know if he gets back to those numbers, but I do think that he has shown enough to where the 3-point percentage can probably climb back up into the 37-38 range. Again, going back to our conversation from CJ the other day, there's a lot of guys in the league who would take 37.3 as their 3-point percentage from the season. Let's just say he gets to there. I think he's back in contention for an all-defense team next season. You go back, and there were probably quite a few people who had him preseason defensive player of the year or your preseason all-defensive team, whatever you want to call it. He is one of the premier defenders in the NBA. And that's just what it is. And I think now, as you were starting to skew, I think for a while, this is more NBA discourse than Herb Jones discourse, but for a while, the defensive player of the year was whoever had the most blocks. Or
Rim protector.
Whoever had the most steals. Sometimes. But for the most part, it was a big man's award. And, when you're anchoring defenses and you're calling things out, you're the quarterback of the defense, that makes a little bit of sense. But I think now we're starting to skew more to perimeter guys. And I think that, he has the capability to win a defensive player of the year in his career. Being on a winning team helps. Obviously, when you win 49 games, you get these accolades. I think he definitely can go back to being that type of player when he's playing more than a handful of games where he's not dealing with some sort of injury. But he's definitely the kind of guy that can definitely bounce back from that.
We did a season ticket event, man, and as we wrap up here this past weekend, the thing that stood out to me listening to you talk about kind of teammate he is, how he's committed and all those different things. He's out there in a sling feeding fans the ball so they can practice shooting at the facility. Fans got a chance to kind of go through a couple of stations and stuff. And I just happened to see a photo of it. And I'm like, is that Herb Jones? I'm like, Herb's there. Because the reason I bring that up is I can't think of a better player. Because we did see some positive and some bright moments of players like Eve Meese, Antonio Reeves, some of these younger players, even Carlo Makovich there as well. You know Herb's going to be here this summer.
Yeah.
Eve said, right, he's staying this summer. I'm just thinking like some of these younger players, who better to work out with? Because I can see it now. They're probably going to eat lunch together, hang out together, work out together. And I don't know. I mean, can you enlighten us a little bit on that? I mean, can you see that guy working out with those guys doing that?
Again, Herb doesn't leave. Herb's going to go fishing one weekend and then pretend. And then, no, I took a vacation.
Right.
Like, he is going to kind of lead by example. And I think that's what he does. He's getting better at being more vocal, but he's a lead by example guy, and he's going to be in there. And I know, look, you look at it, he's not going to be happy with anything that happened this season. And his way to fix that is getting back there and working, and that's what he's going to do.
Herb is like the warm blanket, the comfortable shoes to me. I mean, we went through a brutal season. I mean, that's not breaking news. It was at times it was miserable, and I do think going forward to next season, you just think that, I mean, we only got so little amount of Herb Jones. If we get what we got before, I just feel like it's going to make everything better. It's going to make everyone happier. I mean, the games are going to be more entertaining. I mean, you name it. I just think that getting him back and having him play a ton of games next season and having him on the floor is going to just be kind of the elixir for a lot of things that happened this season.
Let's be honest.
I agree.
The injuries he suffered this year was doing what?
He was hustling.
For the ball.
He was going after the
ball. Right? I mean, it's not one of those miraculous ones him and Andrew slipped coming off the airplane on the road. They know it's literally diving for the ball.
You have film of when I slipped off the plane?
I heard about it. But you didn't. You still performed. Again, only one game missed this entire season, and that was due to the birth of your child. So there you go. What are you doing this summer?
This plane's are slippery, man.
You gonna hang out? Is your wife goes, here you go, all summer?
Yeah. Baby, she goes back to work in in a week, and yeah, it's daddy daycare for the rest of the summer.
So we won't see you till September.
If you do, you might there might be a car seat in here while we're
it's fine.
while we're talking.
Jim will tell you Carver is a regular to sit in here during the podcast, so feel free. Feel free.
Might test that out.
There you go.
Thank you for your time, man. Appreciate it.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks to Andrew Lopez for chiming in there. And look, man, we know his importance. I mean, we can't wait to get him to come back. And again, it just stinks. His injuries, literally him hustling, trying to get the ball, going the extra mile. He could have watched that ball go aside. Instead, he dove on it and all those different. So I think Herb's going to be Herb, man. So I can't wait to see him next year.
Yeah, a lot of ways he's kind of the foundation of the team. He's the pillar that a lot of things are built on, especially at the defensive end of the floor. So, I mean, there's guys that have better offensive stats and flashier highlights maybe, but, I mean, I feel like you just have to have him on the court. And with some of the defensive losses that they had in terms of personnel over the previous offseason, his role was even more important as far as you being able to hold up at that end of the floor.
All right, sir. Anything else you want to hit on here before we get out of here in the postseason?
Let's talk briefly, on this Thursday episode. Let's talk briefly about the next couple nights of the playoffs, a couple quick storylines. Thursday night, Detroit versus New York, Game 3. The Pistons went from 14 wins to 44 wins. What a story. Hopefully the Pelicans will be able to make some kind of jump like that. I don't know if they can win 30 more games than they did this year, but, I mean, that we would take that, definitely. Detroit had their first playoff win since 2008. Can you imagine going that many years between winning a playoff game? Pelicans haven't won a playoff game since 2022, which is only 3 years ago, and that feels like forever to me. So, and then another game tonight I think that's super interesting. The Clippers are hosting Denver. That's the first playoff game ever in the Intuit Dome, so I'm curious to see what that atmosphere is going to be like and how wild the wall is going to be. I know people have talked about how there's some stats to back up that visiting teams struggled on free throws when they were shooting towards the wall in that arena. So we'll see if that can continue. And then lastly, just a couple quick things. I think over the next two nights, I'm interested to see the Grizzlies against OKC. on Thursday night, and then Milwaukee Friday night against Indiana. Two teams that have two of the biggest names in the league, John Morant and Giannis Antetokounmpo. Can they get back in the series, or are they going to be down 0-3 and just kind of quietly, meekly have their season potentially end this weekend? So those are some of the things I'm looking forward to over the next couple nights of the playoffs.
All right, Mr. Jim Eichenhofer, as always, appreciate it. Don't forget, go to Pelicans.com. Each and every one of these podcasts has an accompanying written feature on there. Thank you, Jim. Appreciate your time. Yep, for sure. We'll see you next time on the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast. Join us 3 times per week on Pelicans.com, the Pelicans mobile app, the iHeartRadio app, or where you get your podcast. And be sure to give Jim and Gus a follow on X at Jim_Eichenhofer and GCat_17. We'll see you next time, right here on the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast.